Odysseus survived a giant, a witch, a sea monster, and the anger of a god. But none of them kept him from home as effectively as one fatal impulse, the need to tell the world his name. The Odyssey is remembered as a voyage across the sea. Look closer and it becomes a darker journey, the dismantling of a man who could defeat everything except himself. When we first imagine Odysseus, we usually see a hero on a ship, a brilliant commander struggling against impossible odds, always moving toward the small island of Ithaca. But Homer does not begin with Odysseus at sea. He begins with an absence. The king has been gone for almost 20 years. His son has grown up without him. His father has withdrawn into grief. His wife Penelope lives inside a house, slowly being consumed by men who assume its owner is dead. Odysseus is still alive, yet in Ithaca he has already become a memory. And far away on Calypso's island, he is no longer doing anything heroic. He sits beside the water and weeps. The man famous for escaping every trap cannot leave a beautiful island. The conqueror of Troy has become a prisoner without chains. This is the first contradiction at the heart of the poem. Odysseus has achieved the kind of victory that should complete a heroic life. He helped win the most famous war in Greek imagination. His intelligence became a weapon powerful enough to break a city. Yet the qualities that made him indispensable in war do not know how to lead him back into ordinary life. War rewards suspicion. Home requires trust. War makes identity into armor. Home asks that armor to be removed. War teaches a commander to control the story, conceal weakness, deceive his enemies, and turn danger into reputation. But a husband and father cannot live forever as a strategist among enemies. This video offers a psychological reading of Homer's story, not a diagnosis of its hero, and not a claim that Homer secretly wrote modern psychology. The poem is older, stranger, and morally more difficult than any simple theory. But it asks a question that remains painfully modern. What happens when the identity that saved you in one world becomes the thing that prevents you from returning to another? Odysseus believes he is trying to cross a sea. Again and again, the poem suggests that he is trying to cross the distance between the man the war required and the man his home can receive. The Cyclops episode reveals this conflict with brutal clarity. Odysseus and his men enter the cave of Polyphemus. They find food, animals, and the evidence of a life they do not understand. His crew urges him to take what they can and leave. Odysseus refuses. He wants to meet the owner. He wants to discover what gift this stranger might offer. Curiosity, confidence, and the expectation of heroic hospitality keep him inside until the stone closes behind them. Polyphemus is not merely uncivilized. He is a world in which the rules that protect Odysseus no longer exist. The Cyclops does not respect guests, gods, or the exchange of gifts. He eats the men who entered his home. Odysseus cannot defeat him through strength, so he becomes what has always made him dangerous, a maker of plans. He gives the Cyclops wine. He says his name is Nobody. When Polyphemus collapses, the men drive a burning stake into his single eye. The blinded giant calls for help, but when the other Cyclopes ask who is attacking him, his answer defeats him: nobody. It is one of the oldest and most elegant victories of intelligence over force. For a brief moment, Odysseus survives by surrendering the very thing heroes are supposed to protect: their name. He becomes anonymous. He becomes no one. He escapes beneath the animals of his enemy, hidden rather than celebrated. Had the episode ended there, his cleverness would have carried him closer to home. But once the ship reaches open water, Odysseus cannot tolerate the incompleteness of a victory without an audience. He calls back to the Cyclops. His frightened crew begs him to stop. He calls again. Then he announces himself, Odysseus, son of Laertes, the man whose home is Ithaca. The secret that saved his life becomes unbearable the moment it denies him recognition. Polyphemus now has something he did not have before, a name to give Poseidon. He asks his divine father to prevent Odysseus from reaching home, or, if fate allows the return, to make it late, broken, and empty of companions. This is not a punishment for lacking intelligence. It is the consequence of using intelligence in service of an identity that still needs to be seen. Odysseus has defeated the monster, but he cannot leave without forcing the monster to know who defeated him. The scene exposes a distinction that will follow him across the poem. Survival does not require the same thing as glory. Survival asked him to become nobody. Glory demanded that he become Odysseus again. How many of our own victories become more dangerous because we cannot let them remain private? How often do we escape a conflict, then return through one last message, one last explanation, one final attempt to make the other person admit who won? The practical problem has ended, but the identity still wants payment. Odysseus does not lose years because he cannot solve a puzzle. He loses them because he cannot yet accept a victory that does not enlarge his name. Not every danger in the Odyssey is violent. Some dangers offer relief. On the land of the Lotus-Eaters, the men are not attacked. They are given food. Those who taste the lotus lose the desire to report back or continue home. They want only to remain among the people of the island, feeding on the flower and forgetting return. Odysseus has to drag them back to the ships. He binds them beneath the benches and commands the others to leave before anyone else tastes the same piece. The episode is brief, but it introduces one of the poem's most disturbing ideas. The opposite of suffering is not always freedom. Sometimes it is erasure. The lotus does not destroy the body. It dissolves the story that gives movement meaning. Ithaca remains in the world, but no longer exists as an obligation in the mind. Pain disappears because memory, loyalty, and direction disappear with it. In a modern psychological interpretation, the lotus resembles every comfort that asks us to exchange our future for the permanent suspension of desire. Not rest, which restores the ability to continue, but numbness, which removes the reason to continue at all. This does not make pleasure an enemy. The poem repeatedly values food, sleep, bathing, music, storytelling, and hospitality. Odysseus survives because people feed him, clothe him, and give him shelter. The difference is whether comfort returns a person to life or quietly replaces life. The men who eat the lotus are not cowards. They are exhausted people offered a world in which nothing more is required of them. That is why the temptation is serious. A man in pain does not always dream of victory. Sometimes he dreams of no longer caring whether he wins. But a homecoming requires memory. To return, you must preserve a relationship with an absent place, even when the present offers easier shelter. You must allow the memory to hurt without letting the pain erase the journey. The first great enemy of the return is pride. The second is forgetfulness. Circe and Calypso create two of the poem's most seductive interruptions. Both offer shelter outside ordinary time. Both are powerful, beautiful, and immortal. Neither can give Odysseus the thing for which he continues to grieve. Circe turns part of his crew into animals, transforming appetite into visible form. With divine help, Odysseus resists her power and forces her to restore the men. Yet after the danger passes, the crew remains on her island for an entire year. They eat, drink, and recover until one day the men have to remind their commander that home still exists. The hero who dragged others away from the Lotus can also lose time inside comfort. Self-knowledge in the Odyssey is never permanent. No person simply learns the lesson once and becomes immune. Calypso's island is an even deeper suspension. She offers Odysseus what heroic ambition usually desires: escape from death. If he stays, he can have an immortal goddess and a life protected from age. Penelope, Calypso reminds him, is mortal. Time will change her. Ithaca is rough and small. The alternative is beautiful and endless. Odysseus still chooses the mortal woman and the difficult island. That choice is easy to sentimentalize as romantic loyalty, but its meaning is larger. To choose Ithaca is to choose limitation. It is to prefer one finite life, with history and responsibility, over an eternal present without a true place in the human world. Calypso can preserve his body, but she cannot restore his relationships. She can prevent death, but she cannot give consequence to time. On her perfect island, Odysseus would never become an ancestor. He would never complete the unfinished movement between son, husband, father, king, and old man. He would survive forever while the life that made survival meaningful vanished without him. Here the prison has no iron door. It offers everything except belonging. Many modern traps have this architecture. They do not forbid us from leaving. They make departure feel irrational. The salary is secure. The distraction is pleasant. The routine prevents disaster. Nothing is terrible enough to force a decision, and so years disappear without the drama of a visible catastrophe. The question is not whether comfort is good or bad. It is whether your comfort serves the life you chose, or has quietly become the reason you never choose. The Sirens offer Odysseus neither food nor immortality. They offer knowledge. Their song promises that no one passes without becoming wiser. They claim to know what happened at Troy and what occurs across the fertile earth. For a man whose identity was forged by war, this is not a random temptation. They sing about the world in which his name became great. Odysseus prepares carefully. He seals his crew's ears with wax, but orders them to tie him upright to the mast. If he begs for release, they must tighten the ropes. He wants to hear the fatal song without obeying it. This is often celebrated as another triumph of cleverness, and it is. Yet it also reveals something more complicated. Odysseus does not avoid the temptation. He designs a structure that allows him to approach it without surrendering his future. He knows that knowledge alone will not save him. In the decisive moment, he will not be capable of choosing well. So he makes the choice earlier, while still outside the music, and places his survival in the hands of people who cannot hear his later commands. This is one of the poem's most useful insights into self-mastery. We often imagine discipline as the strength to make the correct decision at the peak of temptation. Odysseus uses a different strategy. He assumes that the future version of himself will be compromised. He changes the environment before that version arrives. The ropes are not evidence of weakness. They are intelligence made physical. Every serious commitment contains some version of the must. A deadline given to another person. An application that blocks the distraction. Money moved before it can be spent. A promise made while the mind is calm. The point is not to pretend desire will disappear. It is to prevent a temporary desire from becoming a permanent destination. But the Sirens also expose Odysseus's hunger to remain connected to the story of Troy. They know the war. They know the heroic past. Their song threatens to freeze him as the man he was at the height of his fame. Home lies ahead. Glory sings from behind. Before Odysseus can return to Ithaca, Circe sends him in the opposite direction, to the land of the dead. The journey seems backward. A living man trying to recover his life must enter a place from which no life returns. There he seeks instruction from the prophet Tiresias, but information is only part of what he finds. He meets his mother. Odysseus did not know she had died. She tells him that she was not killed by disease or violence. Grief and longing for her absent son consumed her life. 3 times he tries to embrace her. 3 times his arms close on nothing. No clever plan can reverse this loss. No name can command the dead to become solid. For perhaps the first time in the journey, intelligence cannot transform reality. Odysseus can only hear what his absence has cost. He also meets Achilles, the greatest warrior of the previous epic. Odysseus praises his fame among the dead, but Achilles rejects the consolation. He would rather live as the servant of a poor man than rule over all the departed. The heroic economy is overturned. The glory for which men surrendered their lives appears different when spoken by a man who no longer has one. Odysseus entered Troy's war as a king seeking honor. He leaves the underworld with a clearer vision of the price. His mother died waiting. His father suffers alone. His son became a man without him. His wife has spent years defending a house suspended between marriage and widowhood. The return is no longer simply the completion of his adventure. It is a debt to the living and the dead. This is why grief belongs at the center of homecoming. We often imagine return as restoration. The traveler reaches the old place, the door opens, and the interrupted life continues. But time did not wait. The person who left no longer exists, and neither does the home exactly as it was. To return without confronting loss would be to demand an impossible past. Odysseus must learn that Ithaca cannot give him back the years. It can only give him a place in what remains. When Odysseus finally wakes on Ithaca, he does not recognize it. Mist covers the land. After 20 years of imagining home, the real island looks foreign. Athene approaches in disguise, and Odysseus immediately invents a false identity. Even on his own soil, speaking to a stranger, he cannot stop being the man of masks. Athene responds with affection and amusement. She recognizes in him something like herself: cunning, concealment, the ability to turn appearance into a tool. Then she transforms him into an old beggar. The disguise is practical. Odysseus needs to enter his occupied house without being killed. Psychologically, however, the transformation completes a movement that began in the Cyclops' cave. The famous king must once again become no one. This time he must remain no one even while being insulted. The suitors mock him. A servant humiliates him. Objects are thrown at him in his own hall. The warrior who once destroyed a city has the power to answer, but he waits. His survival and the restoration of his house now depend on controlling the exact impulse that once revealed his name across the sea. The contrast is deliberate. After escaping Polyphemus, Odysseus was physically safe but emotionally incapable of silence. In Ithaca, surrounded by enemies, he endures attacks without exposing himself. The journey has not made him gentle, and the violence that follows is severe. But it has made him capable of delaying recognition until recognition serves something beyond pride. His old dog Argos recognizes him without speech. The animal has waited through the years in neglect. He sees his master, moves his ears, and dies. Odysseus must hide his tears because the moment of recognition cannot yet be made public. This may be the quietest test in the poem. The man who once shouted his identity to an enemy cannot reveal it to a creature that loved him. He has come home, but homecoming is not a location. It is the discipline to enter the old world without demanding that it immediately confirm who you are. After the bow is strung, the suitors are killed, and the hall is reclaimed. Odysseus expects recognition. Penelope refuses to give it quickly. She has survived for 20 years through caution. Stories about Odysseus have arrived before. Strangers have carried rumors. Hope itself has become dangerous. The man standing before her has the face of her husband, but gods can disguise themselves and clever men can lie. Penelope creates a test. She tells a servant to move their marriage bed outside the room. Odysseus reacts immediately. The bed cannot be moved, he says. He built it around the living trunk of an olive tree rooted inside the house. One of its posts is not furniture placed upon the floor. It grows from the earth beneath them. Only then does Penelope accept him. The secret is not a battle, title, or public achievement. It is knowledge of something constructed together, hidden at the center of ordinary life. The name that mattered before the Cyclops is useless here. The scars of war are not enough. He is recognized through the bed he made before he became famous. And the symbol is precise. Ships move. Heroes wander. Stories change with every teller. The marriage bed is rooted. Yet even this root is not passive. Odysseus shaped the tree without destroying its connection to the ground. The bed joins nature and craft, permanence and human effort. Home is not merely found. It is built around something living that cannot be carried away without being broken. Penelope's test also reverses the power of narration. Across the poem, Odysseus survives by controlling what others know. He chooses names, invents histories, and withholds information. Now he stands before someone whose intelligence equals his own. He cannot talk his way past her. He must reveal knowledge that belongs to their shared life. Being seen by the world made him a hero. Being known by one person allows him to become a husband again. It would be comforting to end the story beside the rooted bed. Homer does not. The families of the dead suitors gather for revenge. Violence threatens to begin another cycle. Odysseus has returned from one war only to stand at the edge of another, this time on his own land. Peace arrives through divine intervention, not because every human conflict has been naturally resolved. The ending refuses the fantasy that inner transformation makes consequence disappear. Odysseus returns with blood behind him. His choices have costs. His home is restored, but it is not innocent. That complexity is what makes the poem more than a motivational story about perseverance. Odysseus is not rewarded simply because he never gives up. At different moments, his persistence becomes courage, pride, manipulation, loyalty, appetite, and endurance. The same intelligence both saves him and extends his suffering. The deeper journey is not from Troy to Ithaca. It is from a self that must be announced to a self capable of being recognized without announcement. In the Cyclops' cave, becoming nobody is a trick. In Ithaca, becoming a beggar is a discipline. At sea, his name demands an audience. At home, his deepest identity is held in a private secret about an olive tree. This is one reason the Odyssey still survives after nearly 3,000 years. Most of us will never cross a wine-dark sea or hear the song of a siren. But we do carry identities built for places we have already left. The child who learned to please everyone may enter adulthood unable to choose. The ambitious person who escaped insecurity may become incapable of rest. The professional trained to appear invulnerable may return home, unable to be known. The survivor may remain prepared for a danger that is no longer present. These identities are not false. They were often intelligent responses to real conditions. Odysseus's cunning is not a disease to eliminate. Without it, he would die. The problem begins when a necessary strategy becomes the only form the self can take. Homecoming, then, is not a retreat into the person you were before the journey. That person is gone. Nor is it the destruction of everything the journey taught you. It is the more difficult act of placing each power in its proper world. There is a time to deceive the Cyclops and a time to tell Penelope the truth. There is a time to pursue knowledge and a time to bind yourself against its song. There is a time to accept shelter and a time to leave paradise. There is a time to protect your name and a time to become nobody. The monsters matter because they expose which part of Odysseus has taken control. The sea matters because it removes the structures that once told him who he was. And Ithaca matters because it asks whether anything remains when the performance of heroism ends. Odysseus spent 10 years winning a war and 10 years returning from the man that war created. His final victory was not the defeat of a giant, a witch, or a god. It was learning that the self which survives the battle is not always the self that can enter the door. Perhaps that is the darker meaning of home, not the place where nothing changes, but the place that asks what in you must finally be put down. And perhaps the real Odyssey begins when the monsters are gone, the audience is silent, and no one is left to impress. When you stand before the life you once belonged to and ask whether you still know how to live inside it.